Welcome to the Hockey Podcast.
And I am Doug Cameron.
On this week's episode, we look at Olympic odds, outdoor games, and why NHL Revealed might actually be more entertaining than 24/7 this year.
And with the Winter Olympics just around the corner, we're going to take a look at the challenge Russian travel agents have booking trips to Sochi.
All that and more. Let's drop the puck on episode 29. Episode 29 is here. Doug, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Luke. I'm doing really good for a Sunday morning.
It feels very early. I guess it isn't. That hockey game between the Rangers and the Devils is supposed to be starting right now, but because of the sun, it is not.
How does that happen?
Well, apparently they have sunlight in New York, and nobody accounted for this.
Yeah. Well, let's schedule a game at noon, and we'll worry about the sun.
It is
the sun at its highest point of the day.
Well, as you pointed out off the air, it usually comes up in the
comes up in the east, comes up in the west, and at noon it's right above you. So we didn't take this into consideration when we laid a sheet of ice in the baseball stadium.
It is episode number 29.
Yes, it is.
I should point out we will get back to pretty consistent podcasts here, I would think.
Yes.
Since we've been getting more and more feedback from people, which we ask for, and then I finally went through and read some of the feedback that we've been asking for. Good feedback.
And as always, they can always send us an email at thehockeypodcast@gmail.com if they want to comment further.
Gone international. We got some emails from outside the country.
That's awesome.
I know.
Hockey fans around the world.
It's a good
I have
year.
The ABC Wide World of Sports theme in my head.
See, I just have the Olympic theme in my head. I think it's going to stay that way for probably the next month or so. So, number 29. We've been doing this all season. Who's the
There's only
number
one.
20? Yeah, really. I mean,
there's only one.
Not even close this time.
Kenny Dryden.
Ken Dryden. He might be the first goalie that we have referenced.
I think so. I think you're right. I think it is.
Go ahead and tell you that next week's will probably be a goalie.
But
too.
here's the funny thing. My 1, 2, 3 for 29
are
all goaltenders.
Really?
Yes.
I only have Ken Dryden. Who else you got?
Felix Potvin and Mikey Palmateer.
Wow, Mikey Palmateer. I miss Felix Potvin. I feel like he wasn't in the league long enough.
You know, I agree with that observation because I was a big Potvin fan, obviously a Maple Leaf.
Oh, yeah, I don't like him as much now. I forgot about that.
But you're right. It was just like he had this flash, and then he kind of just disappeared on us.
And he was like the cool goalie, too. Like, everybody liked Felix Potvin. I don't know. Anyway, outdoor games. Anaheim, L.A. last night from Dodger Stadium.
And in pure Anaheim fashion, they won 3-0.
Yeah. L.A.'s actually, they've lost 5 in a row. Let me adjust the mic while the mic's on. That's always
cool.
a good sign.
Yeah, that's a good sign.
Real
pro.
L.A. has lost. This is my first podcast. So you can't go on a prolonged losing streak in the Western Conference this year. And they're still fine. There's still 64 points, but I mean there are other teams coming up on them if they keep losing.
Well, you know, we're going to get into it in the next segment, but I'm almost feeling, because we were preparing for it, it's like either the Eastern or the Western. The Western, because it's so tight and so competitive. The East, because it's the opposite.
Because everybody is not winning except the top couple teams.
Right? The East is the total opposite. So if you go on a losing or a winning streak in the East, you're going to find you're advancing in the standings. And then in the West, it's just so competitive. You can't afford to put a losing streak together.
Yeah, if you win in the East, you move up. If you lose in the West, you move down quickly in both directions.
Right.
You're right. We'll get more into that later on. But Anaheim, LA, a good game. We got to see a penalty shot in the game. Jonas Hiller pitches a shutout. The Ducks, I don't know. I don't know who's going to take them out.
Anything going to stop that machine?
The only thing, and I keep coming back to this, and this is not a knock on the Ducks. I wish them well. I like it when the teams from the Southwest win. And truth be told, I would prefer Anaheim to LA if it comes right down to it.
I'm in the same boat.
It really feels like they might be peaking a little too early. Everything they're doing is right now. And so I don't say that as in like, oh, Anaheim's going to fall apart in the second half of the season. This is still probably a Western Conference Finals team, but if you're talking about winning the Cup and going through St. Louis and Chicago and Pittsburgh or Boston probably.
But, I mean, they've got 28, 27 games left. So how do you say they're peaking too soon?
Look, I'm one of those people that when I hear that argument, I'm like, that's dumb. At least they're peaking. A lot of teams don't even peak.
Yeah, but they've been peaking for weeks.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you're – okay, do you think Anaheim's going to win the Stanley Cup this year? Is that your first choice?
I think – it's not my first choice, but
okay.
I think Anaheim's in the final.
Ooh, I would like that. I'll drive over to Anaheim, watch some games.
I think Anaheim's in the final.
Okay.
I don't think Chicago can get past them.
Well,
And
Anaheim would have taken Chicago out last year if they had played.
Yeah, right now my gut's telling me that they're there. And I made a bold prediction on Friday with you, and my prediction was correct.
I don't even remember it.
It's a little bit of an insider thing, but you and I follow the Coyotes because we live in Phoenix, and the Coyotes have been struggling, and I predicted that on Friday they would go into Edmonton and they would win that game.
That has nothing at all to do with Anaheim.
But my predictions.
Oh, okay.
I'm a prognosticator.
I predicted that Verbata and Ribeiro would score in that game, and they both did, which has been...
So I think Anaheim is strong enough to do it. I think we will see Anaheim in the final.
So what were your thoughts on outdoor hockey in LA? Because it seemed like that was getting the most attention. And I know it was the first game, but we've got Rangers Devils going on today. It seemed like the outdoor game in LA was getting the most attention because it's outdoors in Southern California.
Well, it's in Southern California, and it's outdoors, and they're skating on ice, and it's 70 degrees.
That's good. It wasn't roller hockey.
No, right. It wasn't, they didn't put blades on in roller hockey, but it got the most attention because it was in Southern California. I mean...
And these are two good teams.
And they're very, very, very good. It's a local rivalry. So, I mean, it had all the elements. I wasn't interested.
Well, that's why you're not a spokesperson for the
LA
series.
Yeah, right.
Well, you're not interested in the New York ones either because you don't think New York should get them.
Well, we'll get there. But, I mean, I was at the first New York-LA one at Caesars Palace.
Oh, back in 91?
I was at that game.
It was like 85 degrees for that game.
It was horrible.
But technology has changed.
I know. It amazes me that they had a sheet of ice. I'm sure it was slow. It had to be slow. There's no way.
In Las Vegas?
No, in L.A. yesterday.
It
looked good.
It didn't look like the guys were moving that slow. And I was talking to somebody that has a history of working with ice in rinks the other day, and they were saying 65 degrees, which is what the temperature was in L.A. yesterday, is about where they can keep it indoors now for NHL games. So 65 degrees isn't that much of a challenge for them. I mean, look, it's not as easy as if you're playing outdoors in Edmonton, but I don't think it's as much of a challenge, certainly as it was in Vegas 23 years ago before they had the technology, and also when it was 20 degrees hotter there.
Well, I mean, I have to eat a little bit of crow because I made a lot of fun of this particular game way back when it was first announced.
This is the one I like the most.
And I pulled out the almanac and the average temperature of LA, and I did all that because it's just easy to make fun of.
Yeah. And you're good at making fun of.
Yes, I am.
Some people like to tear others down, and you're there.
I'm there. I just came back from Utah, where my son was in a hockey tournament. The rinks there were phenomenal. Now, the point of the story is, I'm a big baby when it comes to cold. Yet I'm in a rink every single day.
Yeah, you'd think you'd be used to it by now,
right? So I'm there as a dad to watch my son participate in a hockey tournament. So I've got long johns on. I've got 3 layers of shirts. I got a jacket. I got a ball cap. So I'm all bundled up. I'm ready to watch my boy play hockey, right?
Your kid's like, yeah, that's not my dad. I don't know who that ball of fleece is.
So now I find myself peeling layer 1 off, layer 2 off, because these rinks in Utah were just that. It was like 65 degrees. In fact, I was sitting in one rink watching the game, and I'm like, and I look up, and they have those radiant heaters above the seats, and they were on, but they were on really, really low, so every once in a while you just get a little bit of warm air.
Yeah, that's all it takes.
And I'm like, this is phenomenal.
Contrary to popular belief, and I held this belief for a while there as well, it doesn't have to be -20 in your ice rink for the ice to work.
Right.
Just the ice has to be cold.
In a roundabout way, that's where I was going. I would have always assumed that it would have to be a little cooler in the rink to have good ice, and it's not true.
Yeah.
In fact, the fourth game, I was like super warm, and it was a big building. It was very spacious because a lot of these rinks were built for the Olympics. Oh, look at that, eh?
Yeah. So now I have the theme song playing in my head again.
All these rinks were built for the Olympics, so they were designed properly, and a lot of them were there to begin with, but then retrofitted because the Olympics were using them. I mean, the rinks in Salt Lake were absolutely gorgeous. They were comfortable. I mean, you weren't cold, you weren't shivering. And like yesterday, I was in a suit on a bench for two back-to-back games, and when I came off, man, I was like my teeth were chattering. So back to the outdoor game, you're right. If it's 65 degrees outside, I mean,
It's not ideal, but they were smart enough to play that game at night. So it's not like they had to deal
Not
with
like
a
New
hot
York.
California sun. Well, that's true. But New York, I mean, they're dealing with snow there as well. I don't know. I'd be interested to ask some of the players, would you rather play, and you're going to have to get a player that played in both, but, I mean, if you're playing on the ice surface in LA, I'm sure it's a little bit slower. I mean, you can't say that it being warmer doesn't affect it at all, but there's not snow on it. You're not going through piles of snow like they were in the Winter Classic.
well, I think the cool thing about it is that, and for me, the hard thing for my brain to wrap around is I came from a cold climate, and you're used to seeing the snowbanks around the outdoor rink.
Yeah.
You know, you've got that visual in your head of the toque, and kind of like the Winter Classic, with a little bit of snow falling and stuff like that. Then you go to Southern California. It's like there's nobody in Southern California ever had a backyard rink.
No, there was grass around, and you know what I liked? I'm a big Southern California fan, and they had sort of Southern California themed things going on around the ice before the game. They did have some rollerblading. I think they had yoga, plastic surgery, or whatever. I mean, but it was that kind of thing, and so they embraced being Southern California. And LA and Anaheim have done a lot to really. Specifically LA, when they had Gretzky, have done a lot to push the sport in the southwestern U.S., and it's really paid off. You're talking 2 Stanley Cup champs right there in the last 5 years.
Well, and
6 years.
If you go up the West Coast, I mean, from San Diego up to Santa Monica, up to Santa Clara, the youth hockey, back to the Gretzky era, the youth hockey up and down that coast is solid. It is really good hockey. And, and some dude sitting in New York's going, no way. Well, you know what?
You love New York so much. Admit it, you love New York.
My son's U14 team just went to Chicago and won it all.
Nice. Very nice.
Okay. A U14 team from
Arizona. Not from LA. Yeah.
But it's the same thing. I'm talking these non-traditional markets are putting together really good programs. Alabama has a good program. Nashville has a good program. So it's not just, yes, the Minnesotas and the New Yorks and the Dakotas, they have the pool to draw from, but Southern California, man, they're doing it right, and they did it right yesterday.
Well, we talked about this last year at some point. I don't know, one of the first podcasts we did. You are exposing more young athletes to the sport of hockey, and so if they don't want to play hockey, if they want to play basketball or football or whatever, they're going to do it, but you're giving more and more potential players, the chance to play hockey. And so nationally, when you get to the World Juniors and the Olympics, you have a better percentage of your best athletes playing your sport. The U.S. has a ton of good athletes to draw from, so if you get more and more of them playing hockey, it's going to pay off, as long as you take your best players for the Olympic team.
Yeah, yesterday's game is just a visual thing for me. I'm just so traditional in the brain about, the pond and the snow and everything around it. I mean, I think it's brilliant from the league standpoint to do what they did yesterday because of what you just said. You're exposing this game to kids that probably didn't even think about it. I mean, and I know a lot of people from our area, the Phoenix area, got on a plane and went over to Anaheim. Over to LA.
I almost did.
Anaheim. I went over to LA to watch the game.
Yeah, if you went to Anaheim, you were disappointed.
You were disappointed. There was nothing going on.
Yeah. Real quickly, we have to touch on NHL Revealed that started earlier this week. I want to say Wednesday or Thursday. Everything's a blur.
I loved it. I shouldn't say past tense. I'm loving it. I like it.
Hey, we get 6 more episodes, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. We should almost make a flow chart. That's one thing I liked more about NHL Revealed than 24/7.
There's more episodes.
I don't sit there the whole time and be like, well, we've only got 182 minutes left before this is over. I've been the biggest proponent of 24/7 since before the first episode aired when it was Penguins Capitals, just from watching Hard Knocks all those years. I liked episode 1 of NHL Revealed, and I told you this yesterday. I think I liked it more than this season of 24/7 so far for a couple reasons. And I don't know if you felt the same way, but the biggest thing, and I've said this a few times in the past, I would like it if 24/7 just went all year. And I know that's unrealistic, but you could basically follow one team for a couple weeks. Then, that third week, you've been following Washington, and oh look, they're playing Philadelphia. So now you start following Philadelphia for a couple weeks until they play Pittsburgh, and you start following or whatever. that's kind of what NHL Revealed did. They have so many different players and stories to pick from. It wasn't just here's Toronto and Detroit for 4 weeks, which don't get me wrong, I loved it.
Yeah.
But there's more characters for them to draw from on this show, and they did it. And they didn't even really get to Crosby or Kane or Taves or Malkin. I mean, there was talk about doing Pittsburgh-Chicago because they're playing in that game at Soldier Field in March. They'll get more to them later on, but it was Kyle Oposo and Erik Karlsson, and they just had a ton of different guys to draw from. It was really good.
Yeah, and there were little subtle things, and I'll get into that, but I think, and this is me just a long shot.
Oh, good. Okay.
When 24/7 first came out, Ross Greenberg was the president of HBO Sports. Okay? So it was the initial 24/7 was his baby.
All right.
He now works, he's the executive producer for NHL Revealed.
Oh, well, there you go then.
Okay? And I see the similarities from when 24/7 came to the first episode of NHL Revealed. And I'm like, it's got his fingerprint on it. It's got his feel on it. And I'm like, man, it's amazing how one producer can have that much of an impact on a production like this behind-the-scenes production that they're producing. And I went, don't get me wrong. I love 24/7, and I hope it continues.
Well, there's better things. 24/7 has the advantage in some categories, and I'll get to that in a second, but finish your thought.
So I was noticing little things. I was noticing that NHL Revealed was more character-based, more player-based, more I got more connected to the player, Oposo's baby was born. There were shots like there was one shot, it was a close-up of the wheel on a gurney when his wife was being wheeled in, and the wheel was kind of flopping around. And I went, how did the guy, that was a brilliant shot, and they used it. And then there was that other one where they didn't quite show you inside the room, but they showed you a sliver of the room and the sound within the room. And I mean, it was just brilliant editing to take me in the room without taking me in the room, and also to bring me into the privacy of this wonderful moment, but not ruin that privacy.
Yeah. Well, and I thought Oposo was pretty solid just in that he was willing to be interviewed kind of right before and right after everything happened and throughout the whole thing.
So
I'll tell you what, he's having
little production elements like that sucked me in.
He's having an excellent year, by the way.
Yes, he is.
He might actually be Team USA's best player that didn't make the team. He's well over 50 points already.
Yeah.
But here's where 24/7 still has the advantage. A, you can swear on 24/7.
Right.
B, I still do think it is done better. I still think the production is better. I mean, they clearly pour more resources into it. It's HBO.
Well, it's a short period, too.
Yeah. But NHL Revealed has the distinct advantage, and if they do this again next year, and I would hope that they would, they have the distinct advantage of it being almost a show about the NHL, whereas 24/7 is just
leading
kind of
up to the Winter Classic.
It's limited to your two teams in Toronto and Detroit. I loved it this season, but they didn't have the personality and the characters on those teams that we saw Pittsburgh and Washington and the Rangers Philadelphia have.
Well, I complained about 24/7 this year because I was like, when are they going to talk to Phil Kessel? When are they going to talk to Phil Kessel?
And they did, and it was good.
But it was at the very end.
Yeah.
I'm like, this guy's got to care. How did we miss this?
Aren't you happy I finally watched the last episode?
And then NHL Revealed, too, the other thing that I'm finding frustrating, it's not I don't like it, I'm just finding it frustrating, is there's commercials.
Yeah, that's tough, too. I'm
so used to
you have to
turning it on and going from beginning to end, and now I go, oh, hi, Geico.
Yeah, no, you have to DVR it. I'm not watching. I don't watch anything with commercials anymore unless it's a live sporting event.
So, I mean, I think they're doing a great job. One last thought is that because they are touching on the players, you and I follow the league from game 1 to game 82. I think you could follow that ebb and flow with a behind-the-scenes series. And I don't know how frequently you would do that, if it was once every 2 weeks, once a week. And once a week would be a lot of production, a lot of work. But if you're going to pour the money that you're pouring into the stadium series, then you could probably find a couple of dollars to put into a production.
Well, they could do this show all year, and I like the outdoor games, but that's not why I'm watching the show. I know that's why they're doing this show,
Sure,
but that's not why I'm watching it. I want to see Erik Karlsson trying on a cowboy hat and trying to fit in Nashville. That was hilarious.
I want to see, I suppose so. I mean, showing that human element that, okay, he's a highly paid athlete, and he's playing at the peak of his level, at his skill level and stuff, but he's a dad. The one thing about that opening scene that just still rings in my head, his wife on the way to the hospital, she goes, "What are you looking forward to the most?"
Yeah.
And his answer was, "I just want to hold her."
Oh, that's such a dad answer.
But it's such a great answer. And and it was exposed. I mean, it's exposed that, yeah, I'm a hockey player. Yeah, but there's that inner guy,
But see, I enjoyed the stuff more with like Tavares, because for as good as that guy is, I'm not a dad, so I don't care about the kid stuff yet. We don't hear enough about Tavares out here. The guy was a Hart finalist.
How great was it when he put his sticks up against the Bossy plaque?
That was pretty cool.
That was very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Or when they showed him and they're like, Kyle Oposo's going to have to miss this game, and they showed John Tavares like alone in the room, like everybody left him just because Oposo's not there. A really, really strong first episode. I hope they're all
we'll
that
review
good.
the next episodes too.
You're tuned into The Hockey Podcast. Follow us on Twitter @HockeyPodcast for even more hockey news.
#DoIt.
Segment 2.
Yep.
I feel like we need to take a look here at some of these teams that have really picked up the pace lately that aren't necessarily on everybody's radar yet. So, yeah, Anaheim hasn't lost a game in like 6 months, but everybody knows Anaheim's good. Chicago's good. St. Louis is good. Pittsburgh, Boston, they're good. But how about some of these other teams? And I say we start with Columbus, who just rattled off 8 straight wins before losing last night. But still, 8 straight wins. This goes back to your point from an earlier segment. If you put together a winning streak in the Eastern Conference, you're going to be in a playoff spot. And the Blue Jackets, 8 straight wins, all of a sudden they're third in the Metro.
And who used to sit there?
Philadelphia. Well, really everybody's taken a turn there this year.
Yeah, it's true. But, I mean, at the beginning of the season, we were really hard on Philadelphia just because we were, like, chasing their tail. How long did it take Claude Giroux to get a point?
Well, it took him a while to get a goal.
A goal. He had a few assists, but it took a while to get a goal.
Probably cost him an Olympic spot, too.
But then they went on a tear, and they're at the top of the East, and now they're sitting in ninth.
Well, now hold on. Not the top of the East. Let's not get crazy here. I don't want to give Philadelphia more credit than they deserve. But they were back in a playoff spot, and they could easily still get there if they win a couple in a row.
Well, they're tied. I mean, you got Columbus, who right now is in that third spot in the Metro with 56. Detroit has 56 as we record this. Philadelphia has 56. Carolina is right behind Philadelphia with 55. And New Jersey has 55. So that 8th spot, does that mean Detroit might not make the playoffs?
And this goes back to my earlier thought. What would have happened if Detroit was in the Western Conference this year? Because they're in the East, they'll make the playoffs. I wouldn't be shocked if they upset a good team in the first round of the playoffs. But in the Western Conference, they couldn't do their Detroit thing where they're like, just go ahead and take your time to get healthy because we'll make the playoffs, and like we always do. In the West, they wouldn't have that luxury this year.
No. And I'm looking at the standings right now. 51 games for Detroit right now.
I would bet anybody money Detroit makes the playoffs.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Well, you're the first person I've seen since I made that declaration. I'll bet you pretty much any amount of money they make the playoffs.
Wow.
We'll discuss this off the air.
Yeah.
This is going to be fun.
So your other team, Columbus 8-2-0 in their last 10.
Well, this is the point I want to make about Columbus. They were pretty much done, it looked like, and if they were in the West, they definitely would have been done. Anytime you win 8 in a row, you're going to make a push up the standings. But now they're right there. Bobrovsky looks like Bobrovsky from last year. And Nathan Horton, since he finally started playing games for Columbus, they're 9-2 in games he's played.
Wow.
And so remember, he was their big free agent off-season signing, and then he immediately had shoulder surgery.
Right.
But now that he's playing, he's not the only reason they're winning, but he's made a huge difference. They're 1 point behind the Rangers, and I don't know if that Rangers game's ever going to start today. But, as we record this, they're 1 behind the Rangers, and Pittsburgh might have that division wrapped up at this point. They're 17 points ahead of everybody.
Yeah, goal differential of plus 40. And then there's my boys in blue.
Yeah.
I was ready to throw in the towel of the rest of the city of Toronto.
Well, you've spoken like a true Maple Leafs fan. Would they lose 4 in a row and you guys were done?
They had the the gallows being built for Randy Carlyle in downtown Toronto, but they're in third in the Atlantic with 60 points.
And just
they're 6-3-1 in their last 10.
Just to point it out, they went on a 6-game winning streak, but they've now lost 2 in a row to Dallas. Anytime you give up 7 goals in a loss, never good. And then to Winnipeg.
I didn't watch that game.
Night.
I turned that game off.
I'm sure you did. You wanted Carlisle fired again. So, Toronto's right there. And I do think they're a team, nothing against Columbus. And Columbus is a team I kind of want to see have success because they've been kicked every year. But I think Toronto's more dangerous if they make the playoffs because they have a more consistent offense. Although, if I'm a Toronto fan, other than the fact that I'm just going to be Chicken Little and overreact to everything if I'm a Toronto fan, they get outshot every single game. And I know that that's not the only stat that matters. I mean, you have to look at scoring chances and puck possession and time in the attack zone, but they're always getting outshot.
Well, let's look at this. They're sitting third in the Atlantic with 60 points. Okay? With a goal differential of minus 13.
Yeah, see, that's weird.
That's weird, isn't it?
How about this? Here's weird for you. 4 teams in the Eastern Conference have a positive goal differential. 4 in the whole conference. And one of them is Columbus, who didn't have that a week ago.
Right.
So,
and Pittsburgh's just running away with it.
Pittsburgh,
holy cow.
Boston's plus 37. Tampa Bay, we may as well talk about them here because we're going to have a lot of news and notes anyway. They have absolutely held their own without Steven Stamkos. And he might be back very soon.
Yeah.
Within maybe, today's January 26th, not to give away behind the scenes of when we're recording it.
Well, I think somebody put a fire under Martin St. Louis' butt, Mr. Yzerman.
Yeah, he's been huge.
He's just been outstanding.
He's been huge, and you can't understate the impact he's had on Tyler Johnson.
I wonder what kind of impact he would have had on Team Canada.
Well, that's for you to just keep wondering, buddy, when Sweden or the USA skates away with the gold medal.
Another bold declaration.
Well, I don't know. I'm not willing to bet money on that one. But Tyler Johnson, undrafted rookie, 34 points in 52 games. He's been skating on the top line since Stamkos had to leave.
Right.
And I don't know what's going to happen to him when Stamkos comes back. But here's his last 5 games. Assist, 2 assist, shorthanded goal, hat trick. Wow. 5-game point streak going on. Before that, he had a 3-game point. I mean, he's just been absolutely huge. Nobody's talked about him yet because he's not Nathan McKinnon or Seth Jones or anybody with that high draft pedigree. But that's from playing on Martin St. Louis' line. There's no way around that.
High draft pedigree.
Wow. And I didn't even think about it when I said it.
It just rolled out.
I know.
That's awesome.
That might be my I may have peaked too early. That might be my top moment on this podcast ever. So, Toronto, I don't know. What are your thoughts on them? If they lose a game or two, are you going to be freaking out again?
Yeah, because, history is on my side.
That is true. That's a fair point.
So, fair weather fans are fair weather fans. I mean, I'd like to see him, after watching him make the playoffs last year, I'd like to see him get there again and hopefully go a little deeper.
Well, and I wouldn't say Toronto has fair weather fans. They're just very overreactive fans, which is great from afar.
Well, because it's all emotion and passionately based decision making. Well, what about the West?
Well, the West, the one team that's been standing out is Minnesota. We've talked about them a little bit on this show in the past, but almost as like an afterthought.
Yeah, well, they just leapfrogged over Vancouver.
They did, and the thing that has stood out to me is that they've been doing this without Zach Parise or Mikko Koivu. Now, Parise is back or on the verge of coming back. I mean, he's back, and that's good for Team USA because he'll be back in time for the Olympics. But for them to do that in the West, they're 8-3-1 in their last 12 games. They're 3-1 against Chicago this year, which is another thing that, if Minnesota plays Chicago in a playoff series, I'm taking Chicago. But the Wild played them last year, and now in the playoffs, and now through 4 games this year, they're 3-1. I mean, that's not a fluke. They're at least they've seen Chicago enough where I don't think they're intimidated by them anymore. And again, to be beating them without their best players it's at least worth taking a look at.
Goal differential -4.
Well, I mean, they're not going to blow anybody out, but the story, Josh Harding, what that guy has to deal with off the ice, for him to have the goals against average and save percentage he has this year, that's the best in the NHL. I know he's out right now, but he might be the best story in the NHL this year.
I agree.
So, Minnesota's a tough team. They
it's interesting too
stand
because
out on paper, but they're solid.
They leapfrog over Vancouver. Vancouver has 2 games in hand on them.
Yeah, I think Minnesota started playing in August. We discussed this the other day. I mean, they've played more games than everybody all year.
Yeah, and then you got Phoenix just right there at the door. So,
And Dallas.
And Phoenix plays Vancouver tonight. So that's going to be a game to watch for Western Conference fans and especially for Phoenix Vancouver fans because that's a 4-point swing.
And Vancouver's kind of been free-falling a little bit.
Yeah.
And we'll get into why next segment. But I don't know. The Western Conference, Chicago, St. Louis, and Anaheim are in. Those three teams, put them in. You can probably put San Jose in too. And there's other teams you look at it and you say, okay, yeah, LA's probably going to make it.
Well, I think the top 6 in the West are the top 6 right now. I don't think that's going to change.
I mean, LA's dropped 5 in a row.
Yeah, I just don't think that'll change. I think they can turn that around.
All right.
Well, who's going to take their spot? Minnesota?
Well, Colorado's already passed them.
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota might.
Minnesota could. Dallas, Phoenix, Vancouver, any of them. I don't think LA's going to miss the playoffs, don't get me wrong. But I'm just saying that it shows what happens if you lose a couple games.
But do you think LA's going to get in the playoffs via wild card or finishing top 3 in the Pacific?
I don't think at the end of the day it really matters to them. They've won a Stanley Cup. They know that you have to play your best hockey in April and May anyway.
Yeah, but that seeding could make a big difference in the first round.
Well, yeah, if we see LA Anaheim in the first round, that could be interesting.
Right. So
Chicago Minnesota would be a first round matchup right now if the season ended today. If they just got so fed up with this or the Stadium Series game that can't get started, they just said that's it, the season's over, we're going to the playoffs.
Right.
So, but the point for the West is it's the teams that are now coming up that look like they might actually be out of it. Dallas is right there. Nashville's right there. Winnipeg has lost 1 game since they made the coaching change. Even they're not out of it. The only teams that are out of it.
How long is that honeymoon going to last?
They're not making the playoffs. This is not going to last much longer.
Right.
But still, that's another team you have to look at. Only Calgary and Edmonton are out of it in the Western Conference.
Yeah.
And in the East, is anybody out of it? Buffalo. And realistically, Florida. I don't know how the Islanders only have 50 points. That's a fun team to watch.
Boy, they had a heartbreaker yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, anytime you score the winning goal in overtime and it just doesn't count for no reason and you lose in the shootout,
that hurts.
That's a rough one.
You're listening to The Hockey Podcast. Feel free to email comments or questions to the show at our email address, thehockeypodcast@gmail.com.
Segment 3, Doug, I'm pretty excited here. We might actually get this entire podcast in before the Stadium Series game starts.
It wasn't supposed to start an hour ago?
It was supposed to start before we started the podcast.
That darn sun.
Yeah, a tricky sun. You never know.
We're going to have an outdoor game and we didn't factor in the sun.
Well, sun glare, apparently. They were expecting a sun that wasn't very shiny. Patrick Marleau, Joe Thornton, both re-up with the San Jose Sharks for 3 more years.
That's awesome for them.
Boy, they are set. I mean,
that team's so talented.
You looked at this team in the offseason, and they basically, if you go back a few months, you go back to June, July, the end of last year, they had to come up with deals for Joe Pavelski and Logan Couture, and I'm pretty sure they actually got one of those deals done during the year last year. But those were the first 2 guys. They signed them $6 million each through 5 years after this year, so through 2018-19. And you could kind of sense that's the changing of the guard for the Sharks. Those are your 2 guys you're building around for the future, and those are 2 great guys to build around. And then the cap was revealed to be going back up considerably next year, and all of a sudden they're able to sign Thornton, who's making $6.75 for the next 3 years, and Marleau, who's making $6.6 and change.
I mean, that's huge because you can't. First of all, they're just highly skilled players, but the veteran aspect that they bring and solidify that team with, I mean, that's huge.
And neither one of them is so old that they're not still going to be good for the next 3 years. They'll be fine for the next 3 years.
They'd be good for the next 5.
Yeah, so you're set now. I mean, if you're the Sharks, all of a sudden you went from last year, you getting knocked out of the playoffs or whatever, and saying, we may have to make some serious changes here. Now you're set for the next 3 years. What, you might lose Martin Havlat in 2 years? Mm-hmm. He doesn't even feel like he's on the team right now anyway.
Right.
Dan Boyle's the one guy you got to, and he's a big piece, but that team is in line to continue to be just a power in the Western Conference. Maybe at some point they finally win the Stanley Cup, but 74 points this year. They look really dangerous when they get going. Last night, Joe Thornton scores twice, Patrick Marleau scores once, so that's a good way to celebrate your new contracts.
Yeah, there's a goal for each year.
There you go. Look at that. Look, you just come through with that quick math sometimes. It just really changes the whole complexion of the show. John Tortorella.
Oh, our buddy.
We didn't get to talk about this because last week we didn't get to do the show, but what was it, 142 penalty minutes in the first 2 seconds of Canucks Flames last Saturday.
Right.
204 penalty minutes total John Tortorella with the highlight or low light, I guess, depending on how you're looking at it, chasing the Flames into their locker room at the end of the first period.
Well, he didn't really chase them. He went down to their locker room. He
followed.
Went down the hall and voiced his displeasure of how the game started.
You're getting all choked up
I'm
over
all
it.
choked
It's
up
not
over
that
here.
emotional.
But I'm a big Torts fan. I've always liked John Tortorella. I like his honesty. I like his directness.
He is fairly direct. That's a good way of putting it.
But I think there's a time where you have to reel it in.
Well,
and this is that moment.
This goes back to the NHL Revealed show. They did not show any of this. And I'm sure the league does not like it. That's probably partially why they didn't show it. They weren't really following Vancouver anyway. So that might be why.
But it was it's something that you don't want to show. I mean, they don't focus on fighting as much. You know, every once in a while they get a good fight. But I really think as fiery as John can be, and I don't think that's one thing that they want.
No. And, I mean, I'm sure everybody that's listening has seen the whole events from 1,000 different angles. Bob Hartley gets $25,000 fine. Brian Burke seems confused by that fine.
He's perplexed.
Perplexed. I'm sorry. He used a bigger word than I can. But Tortorella, 15 days, which means he comes back February 2nd, which means he misses 6 games.
6 games, and he gets to come back for a 4-game road trip to the East.
And then the Olympics. Henrik Sedin is missing games. He had gone 679 consecutive games without missing, and he's going to miss his 3rd game tonight. So Vancouver is a team in the Western Conference that has been slipping a little bit of late.
Okay, so I'm gonna equate his actions to a player on the ice. There are guys that are on the ice to fight, and there's goons, and there's guys that know when to fight, when not to fight. Because when you take a penalty for your team, you're hurting the team. It's a selfish act.
Okay.
That's just my opinion. I think it's a selfish act when you take a bad penalty. If I'm battling with a guy along the boards, my stick gets caught in his feet and I trip him, that's different. But when you blatantly commit a foul, you're hurting your team,
especially in the attack zone when they're nowhere near scoring.
Right. I mean, you're putting yourself before the team, and I think John's done that here with his team. He's put himself before his team. Is like, look, you're the coach. You have to set the example. Yes, we understand that you're upset, but you didn't need to go down to the locker room. You voiced your displeasure on the bench during the melee and stuff like that. And then you just go to the room after the first period, chill out, and come back and play the game.
Yeah, as somebody that's watching the Western Conference closely this year, I wondered for a second if maybe Calgary had woke Vancouver up by doing what they did. Because I know everybody's opinion is different, but to me, Calgary starting their 4th line, considering the history between Bob Hartley and John Tortorella, in my opinion, Calgary started that whole series of events. That doesn't mean Tortorella has free reign to act the way he did. I like Tortorella. In a lot of ways, I think he's good for the game, but I hear what you're saying, that you have to know when you're starting to go down the other team's hallway that you're probably going to get suspended.
Listen, you can go into the locker room after that period and voice your displeasure to your team and explain yourself to your team, but causing a scene in the hallway, I don't know if that's a good message to send your players.
If I was a Canucks fan, and I most certainly am not, but if I was, I would be upset by it because the team right now has won 3 of their last 12, and they've got to essentially turn it around here without their coach.
And they got to do it quick because, I mean, we talked about it in the second segment. You got teams like Dallas and Phoenix that are right there knocking on the door, and they want that spot. So, you know, Vancouver's going to have a tough time holding on to that 8th spot.
Yeah, they are, and because I'm not a Canucks fan, I can enjoy the fact that on Saturday, March 8th, the Canucks and Flames play again, and then they wrap up the regular season in a game that most certainly will mean nothing to Calgary. Final game of the regular season, so the Flames will have nothing to lose in that game. That'll be interesting as well.
But I think a message has been sent. I mean, Hartley got the fine. Tortorella got the suspension for his actions. 15 days, 10 days. A message had to be sent. I totally agree with that. I don't think those upcoming games, I don't think you'll see much more come out of it.
I don't think you will on March 8th. But what if Vancouver is out of the playoffs by the last game? Let's just say they missed the playoffs by 3 points. They know going into that game they have nothing to play for either, and Calgary definitely won't. I mean, I'll be paying attention a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. I love Tortorella, so hopefully he'll be back.
He's
just
fiery,
as fiery.
And I do like having some coaches with some personality, and he definitely fits the bill. Quickly to the Olympics. Where do you want to start here?
Off to the Olympics.
Well, you can't get to the Olympics quickly, so
no,
maybe I shouldn't say that.
No. So where Sochi is located.
This is great. You were pulling up maps during our little pre-show prep, and you were just reading off cities in the U.S. that I would never want to go to. I thought you were planning the world's worst road trip ever.
Well, first of all, Sochi is over 1,000 miles away from Moscow.
It's not close.
So is it considered Russia? It's closer to Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan.
Yeah, I feel like you may have mispronounced that. It's closer to
Turkey,
to the Georgia that's over by Russia. It might even be closer to our Georgia than it is to Moscow. I mean, it's not
Sochi
anywhere near
is just north of Syria, Lebanon, because you got Turkey, and just south of Turkey is Syria, Lebanon. It's kind of a volatile area in the world right now.
A little bit right now for like the last 2,000 years.
And then just north up the Black Sea coast is the Ukraine, which is like very volatile right now. And the reason I'm bringing all this up, and I'm not trying to make light of it, is a lot of players that are going to the Olympics are not taking their families with them. Typically you take your family so that they could enjoy, the scenery and stuff like that. And it's like with the volatile areas surrounding where Sochi is, a lot of players are not, because of security issues, are not taking their families.
Yeah, it's a shame because I think you're probably pretty similar to me in that the Winter Olympics might be my favorite sporting event.
I love it.
Love it.
I
love the Super Bowl. I love the Stanley Cup. I love March Madness, but those do happen every year,
right,
usually. But the Olympics, the Winter Olympics specifically, obviously they have hockey, but I get into the other sports. I go snowboarding, so I like snowboarding. And I'll just watch I watch curling because it's on during the Winter Olympics. You're a Canadian, you can't make that derisive
yes, I
sound.
can.
Oh.
I'm not a curling fan,
and I think I'm not either, but I'll watch it in the Olympics. I think that Russia is a great host for the Winter Olympics. I don't understand.
Well, yeah, because when you say Russia, you think of cold and snow.
And they're so passionate about it.
But you think of St. Petersburg, Moscow, not Sochi.
You stole my city right there. Why not have it in St. Petersburg? You're on a body of water.
I'm with you on that.
You're right up there by Finland. This is like a geography lesson today. But didn't they remember the Goodwill Games?
Mm-hmm.
They had those in St. Petersburg one year. I thought they went pretty well. I did a little research because I care. And I went through the Goodwill Games. Not only were they in St. Petersburg, they were supposed to be here in Phoenix in 2005. Did you know that?
Yes.
Oh. Well, they weren't here.
But they weren't here.
They were canceled. I didn't even realize that. But, that was, a 4 or 5 time thing? I don't know. But I know they were in St. Petersburg. I remember that as a kid, and it went pretty well.
Moscow to Sochi is like Phoenix to Portland.
To Sochi? Oh. Yeah.
They're not close.
No, they're not.
There's 16 flights a day from Moscow to Sochi. It's a 2-hour and 20-minute flight.
You should put it actually in East Coast terms. That's probably from about Boston to Miami, right? Off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And the scenery is not the same between.
So I just, the location's weird. The security issues is a big, big concern for the players.
I hope that's not really. I hope it's a lot of.
The Olympics anywhere in the world is a security issue for whoever the host is, because you do have all these athletes coming from all these countries.
Yeah, that's nothing new.
So that's nothing new. But when you pick a location that's close to a very volatile area in the world, I don't know if that's smart.
I hope it's a lot of needless worry and fear. I hope that's all it pans out to be.
The NHL arena looks gorgeous, by the way. I don't know if you've seen pictures of it.
Oh, really?
Oh, my.
Yeah, everything they've shown looks amazing.
And then somebody was telling me that the bill so far is the most any country has ever spent.
Well, yeah, because they want Sochi to turn into a tourist attraction after this, right? Isn't that part of the plan?
That's how Russia goes about it. Hey, can we have the Olympics? We want to turn this little city on the edge of the Black Sea, north of volatile countries, into a tourist attraction.
You would be just a terrible travel agent, by the way. Remind me never to book any sort of trips through you.
Okay, so let's wrap it up. Speaking of the Olympics, we're hockey fans.
What?
The odds are out. on who's going to win the gold medal in hockey this year at the Olympics.
This site seems somewhat shady, so I don't know what happens if I click on view all odds, but I've done it. Here we go. Would you want me to work up from the bottom or down from the top?
Well, off the air, you asked me who I thought, and I gave you my top three. My top three would be Canada, Russia, Sweden.
I noticed you left Team USA out of there. Jerk.
I just don't think they're going to.
Well, they left a lot of their good players here. But I looked at their roster closer.
I wonder if that perplexed Brian Burke.
Well, maybe he was perplexed when he made the decision. I'm at that point where it's getting close to early February in Olympic year where I'm starting to try to convince myself that Team USA could win the whole thing. And they do have a good team.
They have a good roster. Yes, they do.
Canada right now is 9-4, which breaks down to 2.25 to 1. And Russia is 23 to 10, which is 2.3 to 1. So the numbers don't really matter. What matters is Canada and Russia are seen as the two favorites.
Right. With Sweden knocking at the door.
Sweden 5 to 1. I mean, I don't know. Do you think Canada and Russia should be the two favorites?
I'm iffy on Russia.
I'm a little iffy on Russia too.
I'd put Sweden before Russia.
But
I'm not an odds maker. I'm not a gambler in any way, shape, or form.
No, and I'm not either, but it's just this is kind of how the world views who's going to win this. And I get Russia has home ice advantage in a lot of ways. I do think the European teams have an advantage just because if you look in the history of the Olympics, I mean, if you look before 1980, it's just Russia winning every year anyway.
Right.
But if you look from then to, if you look from when the Soviet Union broke up to now, if it's in Europe, those teams do better, and Canada and the U.S. don't do as good. And usually that means Sweden winning.
Right.
And, I mean, Sweden's got a lot of good pieces. They play well as a team. That's the team I'm looking at. I mean, I'm watching the U.S., obviously, and Finland and the Czech Republic are dangerous. Slovakia, if you look at last Olympics, I mean, they made a nice push.
Yeah, but I think teams like Canada, even the U.S., our guys are used to the North American sheet, but they're so skilled and they're so adaptable that if I'm Sidney Crosby and you give me an extra 20 feet.
And you give me Chris Kunitz on my line, too. I mean, I think that was a great move by Canada. Last time it took a little bit for Crosby to get going. From game one, he's going to be comfortable this time.
Right, and I mean, but these guys are just so skilled, and now they're going to be given extra room. I think the other teams are used to skating on that, but it's going to be like, from a North American sheet to the big sheet, you go, look at that space.
Yeah.
I'm taking it, and Sidney Crosby's good at taking
space. Especially the skill guys. Yeah, the real pressure falls on Canada's defense more than anything because those European teams and those players are going to be even better than you're used to seeing. And look, Russia has Malkin, Datsuk, and Ovechkin, and it clearly means a lot to them to win on their home ice. So don't get me wrong, I wouldn't be shocked if Russia won, but I just found it interesting that they're basically even odds with Canada.
Yeah. I still think those are the top three, though.
I was hoping we'd end right there with you saying three words that weren't really words. Yeah, just making some sound. USA, Finland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, all worth keeping an eye on. And Switzerland, I don't know. They're not gonna medal.
But Luke, that's why we play the game.
That's why we play the games. Tell that to Norway. That's it for episode 29. Join us next week as we look at which teams are making the strongest push into the Olympic break.
And, of course, we'll break down another great episode of NHL Revealed, and hopefully we'll find out how bad the glare really was in New York.
Plus, whatever else happens in the next 7 days. Thanks for listening to the Hockey Podcast.